And we are live on the Icecast Live. My name is Shane Chebsey, and next to me is the amazing Ollie McMonee. How you doing?
What a great entrance! Thank you, Shane. You're doing very well. And again, how are you doing, Shane?
Oh,
as it was your birthday yesterday.
Yeah. I'm still classed as young, I think.
Are you?
Yeah, just
you still
about,
come under that demographic, do you? 18 to 49. Is that how it works? Everything after that is Saga holidays and Viagra.
I haven't had this. Yeah, I haven't had the Saga yet.
Not yet.
And
I'm sure
I haven't had need of the Viagra. So but it's So this is one last year to enjoy, isn't it?
Yeah.
but it was a good day, mate. Spent it with family. And had a proper day off. Didn't do anything really. Nothing to do with comics. Nothing to do with the day job. Just had a day with family.
Good.
Yeah, it was a nice day as well yesterday. Nice and sunny.
It was lovely.
Yeah, it was good. And you're keeping well, mate?
I am, thank you. Sun's out, so of course it lifts everyone's spirits, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
Yes.
I think it makes a big difference, doesn't it? A bit of sunshine.
Of
course, and we've got lots to look forward to as well. We've got I am rearing up with Comixology now. We've just got just over a month of promotion for that, so that's keeping me occupied. Very exciting as well, to have such a major event coming up. And I'm working on this new Dracula book as well, which is now out there.
Dracula.
Yeah, Dracula. That's keeping me busy as well. So lots and lots going on, mate.
You wouldn't have it any other way, would you, Shane? You're like me. You like to be kept busy.
Yeah, I do. I really like to be busy, and that's how I managed to fit this malarkey in as well.
Yeah. Well, I see this as a relaxing hour. To be honest, this is the break from the storm that seems to be Thursdays for me.
It is nice, isn't it? It depends on the guests a lot of time, but I find it very relaxing just chatting with people about stuff that we're actually interested in. Because most of your life you're talking to people about stuff you're not interested in. So.
And I must admit, I've got a great interest in Celtic mythology, so I'm very keen to quiz both Andy primarily and Nick on the sort of mythological Celtic stories from a very particular area in Britain, the Isle of Man, when we talk about their new comic Cold Iron tonight.
Now, I've just had a comment come through before we start from Ashok Patel. Is there a current guest list? What for, Ashok? I think you're talking about Comixology. If you go onto Comixology.com, there is a guest list on the guest page, funnily enough. And all the guests that are so far confirmed are on there. There are 2 more guests, I think, that I have to add to that page, but that is pretty much most of the guests. So go onto the website and you will be able to see the full guest list. Thanks for the comment, though. So, yes, as you alluded to, we are talking, of course, to...
Oh, I didn't allude. I think I was pretty spot on there. There was no illusion.
You were.
I named the people we're interviewing. I named the comic, and I named some of the themes, but not all the themes.
Thanks for that, Sam, by the way, showing the website. So I won't go into detail about that because we've got a lot to talk about tonight.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll do a Comixology Icecast closer to the time.
Yeah, we definitely will, mate. We definitely will. But of course, we are talking to Andy Diggle and Nick Brokenshire tonight about the new book, which looks very cool. And as you say, is steeped in Celtic mythology. Cold Iron is the title of the book, which you can see on the ticker across the bottom there. And it's very exciting, and it's very interesting as well because this is being released digitally at the start, a digital only product by Comixology.
Yeah.
And they're doing a lot of cool things actually, Comixology, aren't they, Ollie?
Very much so. And I like their sort of business model. I'm sure it's the creators behind it, where, as you said, as you alluded to, they bring them out digitally first, then a few months later join in with particular publishing houses up and down America to publish them in floppy copies, which I think's nice.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of doing things. So, without any further ado, then let's bring our guests on. Let's play the intro, Sam. And good evening, and welcome back to the Icecast Live. And welcome, Nick and Andy. Good evening, guys.
Hello. How you doing?
Good to see you. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate you having us. We just caught you having a crafty little swig there, Nick. Was that a bottle of whiskey?
It's this heinous non-alcoholic Brooklyn lager.
What?
But what's the point of
that? That's a soft drink, isn't it?
Brooklyn's good though.
Basically, yeah, it is yeah. My mother-in-law found it in this little local shop, and she said, "Oh, you'll like this," and I was like, "No, you know."
So you're drinking it out of politeness, then, Nick?
Yeah.
She's obviously watching this program, isn't she, Nick? That's why. See, I am drinking it, honest.
Yeah. I didn't pour it down the sink earlier, honest. What's your poison there, Andy?
This is just water, I'm afraid. It's very boring.
Oh, you rebel.
I'm being
absolute rebel. So let's get on to business. You guys have been really busy with this new project, which I'm really interested in. And Ollie, I believe you have had a little sneak preview of the book.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it, I must admit. But like I said, it pushes all the right buttons for me.
Because there's a big sort of Celt mythology aspect to it. So what was the formation of this story then, Andy? Did you have
very personal, isn't it?
Yeah,
Andy,
is it a personal thing? Yeah.
I mean, partly, obviously, most of it's made up because it's a comic. But in fact, you got me worried, Ollie, because you said that you kind of like you're really interested in studying Celtic mythology, and so you're going to realise that actually most of it I just completely made up.
I was looking for the turnip lamps, I must admit.
But the island it's set on the Isle of Man. Which, for those who don't know, is an island that's right in the middle of the Irish Sea, kind of slap bang in between England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And it's a place that, like, my family's got a long history there. Like I've got distant relatives from there. My dad was evacuated there during the war years when he was a little boy with his great aunt. And so when I was little, we would spend every summer there, staying with like his great aunt. And then when my older brother, Mark, who's about 8 years older than me, he went to live there when he was like 18 and I was about 10. So I'd go and stay with him and we would just kind of explore the place. I remember like one time there's lots of old kind of like Neolithic and Celtic and Viking like ruins and stuff around the place. So one weekend, like Mark and me, we just spent the weekend with an ordnance survey map, just driving around, finding standing stones in fields and just kind of checking them out, and finding like old, there's literally rooms, Viking ruins carved into them and just kind of sheep grazing around them. Not any kind of tourist attraction or anything. They're just there, but the whole place is like that, it's just, and there's a castle here and there's a Neolithic burial mound there. And there's, there's a Viking longship was literally buried there as a rather, when you think of a Viking funeral, you think of kind of like they're sending, a burning longship sent to sea. But this one, I think it was like a trader, like a Viking trader. So they just buried him in his ship right there, Wow. And it's full of this stuff. And the locals just kind of graze their sheep around it, just kind of carry on.
But they're used to it, aren't they?
Yeah,
it's
nuts. They don't really consider it a huge tourist. I mean, they've got tourist attractions. They've got like castles and stuff, which is super. Obviously, when I was a kid, that stuff really fired my imagination. But it's just the kind of little forgotten bits in the nooks and crannies that I find somehow even more compelling. Because the idea of there's this kind of secret places that people don't even know are there, and I've always found that idea really compelling. Like we would discover, like when I was quite small, we just discover old mine tunnels. And it would just be like this black shaft leading off into the middle of a hill, that you only found if you clamber down the side of the cliffs at Bradder Head or something like that. And it's like, it was just that stuff all really fired my imagination when I was a kid. And there's also this very rich kind of fairy folklore there as well. I remember when I was very small, went to stay with my brother Mark, and we were down the pub with him and his mates. They were like 20, I was 12, something like that. So I was having a Coke. But I'd heard this folklore thing where they think of rats as being the wee folk, from the other side kind of thing. And if you use the word rat, it brings bad luck. And like we were sat around this table with all Mark's friends. They were all kind of like sort of 20 odd or something like this. And I said, so is it true that, you can't say the word rats? And everybody went, whoa, don't say that. Like, really? Okay. And there's kind of like, you wouldn't, if it was some old fisherman or something like that, you'd think, all right, fair enough, he's superstitious. But these were all young guys, And I was, like I say, I was a very young guy at the time. But that kind of thing really stayed with me, you know. And I really liked that idea of that kind of like, you know, very kind of earthy, modern vibe. I mean, that would be in the kind of early 80s around that time, I guess. So, you know, like
you were probably talking about Roland Rat, and that's why the word rat slipped into the conversation.
I can't say that my musical taste did not comport with the world at the time, but they were right and I was wrong about that. But yeah, no, but that stuff, you know, but that combination of that kind of very earthy kind of like, you know, sort of blokey blokes, but at the same time, they're kind of, you know, like respectful to folklore and stuff. And I just found that really interesting. The contrast was really interesting and it always stayed with me. And yeah, so like poor old Nick, I was kind of like saying, well, in the script, I'd be like, okay, we're driving like north along the Sulby Valley Road kind of thing. And he's like, what? I'm guessing you've never been there, Nick, right? You know, so it's kind of like, I hope probably you had to use a lot of Google Earth reference or something, but I just got such a strong mental image of it all in my head because all of the places in the story are places I know. You know?
Were you able to sort of provide visual reference at all, Andy, for Nick, or was it just Google
probably
that?
Not enough. I imagine that. I mean, that's a question for Nick, I guess. Like, tell me how bad was I at the website?
No, you did. You provided a lot, but I did do a lot of research. I had to study a lot of aerial shots, and you know what I mean, to try and get the look of certain places and stuff. Especially later on in the book. There are a lot of very specific shots, but it's interesting what you say about you growing up and, you know, and visiting these places. I grew up in a place just like that. Basically, I grew up on a place called Midmar on a hill called on a hill called the Hill of Fair, and my nearest neighbor was a castle. So we had like our house was sort of in forestry land, and then down the track was a castle, and then just beyond the castle was an old kirk with standings that had been built near standing stones. So that's just where I grew up. So when
That's
so when you
why did you leave?
You know,
oh boy, that's a story.
Wonderful.
That's a real story. I've been spending the last 30 years trying to get back, but anyway. So when you proposed the story, I was just like, yes, because I think your words were, do you want, because I've been doing so much Star Wars stuff, you were like, do you want to just keep doing sci-fi things? And I was just like, no. And then you said, well, I've got this, fairy thing. And I was just like, yes, because that's my world. You know what I mean?
I remember I said something about like, old, ruined farmhouses and mossy dry stone walls. And you're like, yes, I just want to draw dry stone walls.
Yeah, that was it.
It's funny because I think Ollie's the only one actually that probably hasn't lived in an environment like that. Because I actually
I grew up in North Wales.
Well? Right.
And of course we're down by Molfama, which is one of the bigger hills we used to be route marched up every Sunday. There was another one of those hills that King Arthur was meant to have been buried under. So I grew up very much not only with the rich English tradition of King Arthur, but with the Welsh Mabinogion tradition of King Arthur as well. So my roots, whilst where I grew up wasn't very Welsh, I certainly fell in love with the legend of Arthur being brought up in that kind of, not hilly area, but certainly you had a lot of depth to the stories, particularly in North Wales, that went through generation after generation. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I joked about the turnips earlier, Andy, but where I live now in Birmingham, people didn't celebrate Halloween back in the 70s and 80s. No. And of course, when we were younger, it was turnips that you would hollow out. So it was interesting sort of looking at the research, particularly of the Isle of Man and their version of Halloween that I know we'll speak profusely about in a moment or two. Their turnip lamps was something that I could relate to as well. Like going out on Halloween and just the stink of turnips everywhere.
I remember when I was little, like my mum gave me a turnip on Halloween to hollow out and make into a lamp. Like when you're a little kid, hollowing out a turnip is hard, man.
It's hard work, yeah.
I think it's tough as an adult, to be honest. I just never tried it.
I think we had sugar beet because there was a sugar beet factory near to the village where I used to live. And they used to pile up all the sugar beet in this field. And all the kids at Halloween would go and rob loads of sugar beet and hollow those out because no one had, pumpkins or turnips for that matter.
I've got this mental image of like Merry and Pip from Lord of the Rings here in Farmer Maggot's field,
I mean, it's great though, isn't it? When you're growing up in the countryside, I think you have to have a fertile imagination, don't you? Because
there's nothing to do. Yeah.
Because there's nothing else. Yeah. So you go out and you go out in the woods, down the river, go to the fields, find these old like buildings, make up stories in your head about where they came from and what they were. I mean, we had a lot of like medieval stuff near where I lived, but we had a lot of other stuff as well, like old war stuff, because there was a World War II air base near where I lived, and we used to go and hang out in old gun pits and things like that.
The same. I mean, like I said, I didn't grow up in the Isle of Man. It was a place we would visit family there, but I grew up in South London. But at the same time, it's kind of, it was the same thing. I had this fascination with old and derelict places. So we're always kind of breaking into derelict houses and playing around in old, like, going up to Biggin Hill and playing out in old sort of pillboxes and, stuff like, old World War II stuff in the woods outside Biggin Hill Airport, so the same kind of thing,
Yeah.
I mean, you joke about Cold Iron being, made up and all of that, but there's a lot of, I mean, the very title itself has allusions to sort of Celtic mythology and this. Well, I'll let you talk more about the title, but there are bits in it that I think a lot of people can relate to, even more modern communities like maybe American readers, because every American thinks they come from somewhere else, don't they? So you've got the Cold Iron, you've got the horseshoe, you've got. It's very much a very built-in real world from the very first few pages.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, I knew it was going to get very, very supernatural the more it developed, but I kind of gave it a fairly filmic kind of structure. So the first issue is largely set up and nothing, you don't see too much that's deeply supernatural. There's a couple of full-page splashes that Nick completely aced that just kind of tell you, okay, there is actually crazy stuff here. But I wanted to ground it in that believable real world and make it feel very familiar and kind of relatable. And I wanted the characters to feel like familiar and relatable. I didn't want to populate it with kind of like, tough guy, vampire hunter type characters or something like that. I wanted it to be ordinary people who were just, I think wasn't really conscious of it at the time, but I think I've always been kind of inspired by like an early Spielberg was really good at taking that regular everyman character and then dropping them into like a really extreme.
Yeah, it really works.
With Brody and Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters. They're just kind of ordinary family men who suddenly have to deal with an incredible situation, and they have to kind of enter a whole new world. And that kind of seems to have fallen out of fashion a little bit. That kind of everyman hero. At least in kind of big, like sort of adventure or supernatural stories. So I wanted to give it a bit of that flavour,
And here we're seeing we talk about the everyman or every woman, Kay here, the main protagonist, and here she is singing one of her songs. So can you tell us a little bit more about her and her sort of domestic situation?
Yeah, well, she's a young woman in a I guess sort of like early to mid 20s who's kind of she wants to be a singer-songwriter. And sort of she's got dreams of stardom. She wants to kind of go and do her own thing and sort of travel the world and find success through her music. But she's sort of stuck there. She's stuck on the island, which she doesn't really appreciate the fact that it's kind of a great place.
Well, you don't in your 20s, do you? It's like that's the age when you want to escape, isn't it?
Right. Because we're old farts. We want to go and live in a kind of rural kind of landscape. But when you're young, it's just boring.
Oh,
and so, and then something happens one night. I mean, what you're seeing on the screen is where she's meeting this young girl, Mona, who's just basically just kind of runs in front of her car and nearly gets hit. And this is on Halloween night, or Hot Tunar, as they call it in Ireland.
Right.
And, something weird is going on, which I won't spoil right now. But and it's kind of about, Mona's been in a bad situation, which Kay then starts to help her get out of. But she's not sure whether, is Mona crazy? Is like what she's describing really what's going on? Because I wanted to ground it in that kind of, if somebody came and told you the story that, she's telling, you wouldn't believe it. You'd think this person is probably mentally ill, or, or if it's on Halloween, then they're just winding you up, and then you start to get really spooky,
It's funny you were saying about, like, in modern movies and stuff like that and modern comics, a lot of the time the characters just accept when really weird stuff happens. And it's just not real, is it? You know, in the real world, even though we're exposed to all this stuff, most people, most rational people would question it. You know, when somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, I don't know, I've just seen a UFO," or, you know, "I've just seen a minotaur walking through the woods," you go, "Yeah, all right, mate." But
the UFO one's a funny one. I spend like half my life on UFO Twitter, just kind of lurking and seeing what's going on there. And on the one hand, it seems like, you know, half the world actually believes in aliens already.
Yeah.
Like it's no big deal. But on the other hand, if anybody says that they saw a UFO, everybody treats them like they're crazy. And so it's this weird kind of like dichotomy about the whole thing, you know.
Yeah, I think with UFOs, actually, that might be an exception because, you know, with all the fantasy stuff, yeah, people would just think you're crazy. But with UFOs, I suppose there is that sort of more scientific belief, if you like. I know that's almost a contradiction of terms, but there is that sort of, well, if you, you know, if you
there was
think
a phrase
about it
for
logically,
scientific but made up as well. There was a phrase,
pseudoscience. That's it. So, but you know, it's that. But there is that, I think, and a lot of people think, well, there is a logical, you know, explanation that there could be aliens, you know, whereas the chances of there being, you know, a fairy in the woods is a little bit less likely. So I think that, yeah, people do. I think you're right. I think UFOs are quite unique in that respect. That
I mean, I should say, I don't think that UFOs are actually aliens. You know,
no, I've never.
Like I say, I kind of fell down that rabbit hole over the past couple of years, and I'm still fascinated by what's going on, but I don't think it's aliens, and I don't think it's fairies either. I think fairies and aliens are about as likely, you know. But in our story here, you know, it's just magic. I'm not even pretending to have a scientific explanation.
There's no sort of deconstruction of it. It is, but it is in a modern.
I'm not clever enough to deconstruct anything, you know.
but the world that Nick, I mean, even on these few pages we're seeing, you've got those stone walls, you've got creepy looking shadowy trees, and even the branches look creepier than normal branches. I think certainly the world you're welcome into in the first issue really does set up what's to come. And I think it really does it wonderfully, Nick, if you don't mind me saying so. And I'm dare say, like you say, it must have been a nice break. Love the T-shirt, by the way. It must have been a nice break from doing aliens in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I relished the opportunity to do it because I mean, all artists like drawing landscapes anyway. Well, I think they do anyway. I think they do. But I just go, oh wow, I get to draw trees, you know, and because in Star Wars, all you get to draw is spaceships, which is super cool. But sometimes you just want to draw trees.
It's a lot free. It's very freeing, I should imagine. You know, it gives you a lot of freedom, doesn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's beautiful color palette.
Oh well, that's all Trina. You know, we let her loose on that, and she really came up with the goods. We just said to her, just go for it. Just do what you need to do, and very little in terms of having to guide her. She understood it. So I don't know if she's from a rural part of Ireland, but you know, she understands like the light. You know, even in those pictures that you've got there, that's very much that weird glowing light that you get when you're in the sticks. You know, you can see everything, but you can still dark. But you, like, if you're in a forest, the forest looks black, and yet you can still see everything because of the really brightly lit sky. She nails it, I think.
Yeah, that's great, and it's true as well. Yeah, I remember I got lost in the woods once when I was a kid. We were out playing, and I just totally lost my way. It was a terrifying experience, but it was made more terrifying by the fact that you could see so well, you know.
Yeah.
And so you were just looking for things lurking in the woods. I was probably only lost for about 10 minutes, you know, but it seemed like forever when I was about 7, you know, in the middle of the woods. Absolutely terrifying, you know.
Well, those pictures right there, where the Land Rover is driving past the forest, that's referencing my childhood because on our hill we were in a forestry area, so we were just surrounded by pines like that, and and loads of dry stone walls like that. And then if I left the house, I'd often leave like near the middle of the night and walk through the forest at midnight in order to get to the other side of the hill where my best friend lived, way on the other side. And I just went with my dog, and it would be absolute pitch black, but you could see everything. You could see through the trees, you could see the light, and that's what it looked like. I'm not even kidding. It's really what it looked like. And so the opportunity to draw that was just fabulous.
Takes you back.
I should say, actually, it's kind of a shame that the preview doesn't really show you the cool stuff that Nick gets to draw. I mean, you're like the landscapes are great, but you've got a few pages of the preview, but what happens on the next page is where the supernatural stuff starts happening, and that's where, it's really creepy. But we didn't want to spoil the surprise,
No.
So,
I mean, how much information as a writer, Andy, do you have to give to someone like Nick? Or, I mean, obviously you must have certain characters that you want a specific look for, but do you give Nick a more freer hand in designing other periphery characters, let's say, without giving away which kind of supernatural characters turn up?
I think I was probably a bit more bossy about the human characters, wasn't I? I think I probably drove Nick a bit mad, just kind of a bit more like this, a bit less like that, with Kay especially, I think. But the others, I think it was pretty much just you doing your thing, wasn't it? But you tell me like where I became overbearing. It's important for me to learn this stuff.
No, you were never overbearing, Andy, never. But like, I just
a little laugh at the end.
No, it's all like, because we sculpted her quite a bit, really. Like, we went through a lot of iterations, and I had to. I suppose all artists do this. You have to go through all these processes in order to get somewhere. Sometimes you get back to the beginning. You start with a design and you think, no, I've got to try all these other things, and then you kind of end up back where you started. And
is she based on anybody? Was there somebody in real life that you could like took an influence from?
Visually, no. She actually, there are a couple of people vaguely that I referenced. One was this Scandinavian folk singer that I'd found a picture of, and just walking around in this lovely Scandinavian jumper, and I had her in my head a little bit when I drew her. There's also a French model that I kind of used for her hair and stuff like that. And for a little while, Andy, I don't know if you recall, I elongated her a little bit, and she became kind of like fashion designy. And that's when I was looking at this particular model.
It looked cool, but she just looked like she'd spent a little bit too long in front of the mirror, for the person. It was interesting because all of these design sketches he did for Kay, they're all going to be in the back of the collected edition. So you get to see what this evolution that Nick's talking about. You actually get to see, literally, you actually said in the notes, didn't you? Like, this one's got the kind of Scandinavian folksy kind of vibe.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's always nice to see that sort of back matter of stuff, with the sketches, and I'm a sucker for all that stuff. So it is interesting as well, because we said earlier this is like a digital only release at the moment with Comixology originals. But are we allowed to say where it's going to go after that?
Yeah, it's going to be Dark Horse will collect it eventually.
Right.
Once the run's completed on Comixology. I don't have a date for that. I don't know what the schedule would be, but it should be nice. Like we've already put together all of the back matter for it. It's got a ton of stuff in the back. There'll be various extras. But I guess we're supposed to be promoting the digital version right now. So I probably
indeed. I just know that I'm curious, and I know some of our listeners will be curious about,
well, what I like about Comixology, I know there's a lot of slagging it off at the moment and all that, but people forget that if you signed up to Amazon Prime, like a lot of people are, you're actually getting that digital issue for free. And I think because we're so bloody picky in this world, we forget that you're reading quality content that's taken a whole team to create, not overnight. I mean, we're hearing it here, right down to the character design. And then the first instance people can read it, they're able to read it for free. Then, like an old schooler like me, it's going to be, right, I'm hooked. I want to get that collection. But I love the fact that you can dip into it. You can read it on the go. I've grown into digital, maybe because I get so many of them to review. But I really like digital comics because of that availability, because you can read them on the go. And also, it doesn't wake my partner up at night when I'm reading from a Kindle, whereas putting a light on to read a book does wake her up.
Yeah.
Well, I think comics look great. I got like a secondhand, like an iPad Pro, one of the really big ones. Off eBay, and like comics look amazing on that. Like
they do.
Said, like,
perfect for comics. Yeah,
they're made of light. You know,
yeah,
they're incredibly vibrant. You know, and when you I used to be quite skeptical about it, but no, I'm kind of sold.
And I think particularly a comic like this. I mean, we've seen a lot of it set. It's not all set in the darkness, but I think that plays the strengths of being read digitally. I mean, we talk about that color palette. I mean, there's so many rich colors because we're all seeing it on a screen now, and I think that works really well. I wonder, Nick, whether you take that in mind if you're drawing something that's going to be digital as opposed to something that's going to be printed, or whether the colorist takes that on board.
Well, sort of. The way I tend to approach comics, I think I may have heard this somewhere along the line, like from one of the greats somewhere along the line, was that the comic has to work in black and white first. You know what I mean? Like, it has to tell everything that you need to understand regarding, you know, the day and the night and the atmosphere. It has to work in black and white so that when you do apply color, you know, it should enhance it.
It's an enhancement, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one of the problems with that is that some colorists over egg the pudding, so they'll come charging in with tons and tons of color or muddy things up a lot, when really all you might need is one or two colors, because the black and white is there to tell you everything you need to know. And in fact, I've spoken to Sean a lot about this. When we did that show in California, Andy, like, Sean goes on about that a lot, because obviously he works in such chiaroscuro, and you know, you only need light brushings of color really to work in this medium, especially with so much black. So yes, I do consider that, but I don't rely on it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. You're not. It's not in the forefront of your mind when you're tackling a page.
No.
Well, you're using a lot of real sort of solid blacks, aren't you, in this approach? So I totally agree. You know, you all the information about form and mood and light is all there in the black and white, and the colouring is great because it just enhances what you've already done.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Although it must be said that we kind of found ourselves for this one a little bit as well, because I think perhaps because of the work I'd been doing previously, I'd not been in that headspace, and it took Andy to say, no, it needs to be more black, it needs to be more dark. Do you remember when we were doing the first couple of pages? Yeah, and I was just like, oh yeah, and then I kept piling it on and just going, oh, of course, you know, we've got to create the mood, you know. But Andy, you know, had to remind me of it a couple of times. But once we were up and running, it was all good. But yeah.
And it's I mean, it's a great idea for a story. I mean, it evoked a lot for me, as we were talking about before, you know, with the mythologies and the living in the countryside and all that sort of thing. But if you were just to do a straight plug to a cold audience, what would be your selling point for this book? How would you sum it up?
I was thinking that I need to come up with like a nice tight little description of it. I guess I'd call it like a supernatural thriller. Based around like fairy folklore, because like tonally, it's kind of it's hard to pin down genre wise. It's got elements of a sort of a stalkerish thriller because Mona and then Kay are being hunted by something supernatural. So it's got like horror movie vibes, but there's parts of it that are almost kind of comedic. You know, I used to describe it as like, you know, the Bill Forsyth movie, Local Hero.
All right.
I used to describe it as like Local Hero meets Pan's Labyrinth. You know, that kind of, you know, like a small rural town meets supernatural creatures.
Right, yeah.
But there's also, especially later on, when we actually get to see some real supernatural stuff going on, there's a little bit of Jim Henson in there. There's a little bit of like Labyrinth or something like that, especially when Nick really gets to go to town on all the weird creatures and stuff. So yeah, because if everything's unrelentingly grim all the time, then it becomes a bit oppressive, So you want to have the highs and lows emotionally, But yeah, I'd call it. I wanted to kind of have that sense of you're being hunted by something, but nobody believes you. So that's why I think it's important that the characters be very grounded and believable, and they're kind of situated in a very believable world, because the things happening to them are unbelievable, and that's why nobody believes them. So they've just got to deal with it themselves. And the way to deal with it is by paying attention to the old folklore, the old superstitions that she always dismissed.
So it's very much characters using their ingenuity, if you like.
Yeah, no, I had this really strong sense that Kay was like a really like no nonsense woman. She's kind of like, nobody else is going to help her, then fine, I'll bloody well help myself kind of vibe. But she's she, like I say, she's not a tough guy. She's she works in a pub and she takes no nonsense, and she's used to kind of like throwing out like surly drunks and stuff. But it's not like a street fighter or something. And this isn't that kind of story. This isn't really a kill the monster kind of story. It's a bit requires a bit more lateral thinking to solve the problems that they're presented with. And I wanted it to feel very personal. Sorry, I wanted her stakes in it to be not just kind of like trying to save her own life from a monster. It's more about like more of an emotional bond and kind of a sense of responsibility. There's a sense, without spoiling it, there's a sense that she feels to start with that it's somebody else's problem, and then she realizes, well, actually I need to actually step up and deal with this myself, because otherwise there's going to be a bad outcome.
Those are always really compelling arcs, aren't they, for a character? To go from that sort of carefree, I don't care attitude to then gradually realizing that they do have to step up and take responsibility. I always find that really compelling.
There's always a bit in the like whenever there's a bit in the movie where somebody basically refuses to follow orders, or they rebel or desert in order to go and do the right thing. That always gets me. I love like a righteous mutiny. Just for some reason, it always punches me right in the heart. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's I was just rewatching, actually. I don't know if you guys are fans. I was rewatching Babylon 5. And I'm just going through season 3 where they rebel against Earth, and it's just there's so many punch the air moments in it where they just.
I've never seen Babylon 5, and you just spoiled it for me. Ruined it,
mate.
Ruined it.
Mate,
it only warms up in series 3, from what I remember back in the 90s. Yeah. Whereas most TV series take one series to warm up, that felt like it took 2, and then I think maybe Channel 4 put it on a different time. I started watching it; got very exciting very quickly.
Yeah, season 3 was absolutely awesome, I have to say. But I am biased. I'm a massive fan. But it was a classic example of that. That sort of rebelling against authority and like going, facing the consequences of rebelling. It's very easy to rebel when there are no consequences, but when everybody else is against you and you're out there alone, to rebel is the ultimate courage, really.
Yeah,
and I love.
I was about to start banging on about The Expanse, which is a sci-fi show that I love. And there's loads of moments where people just kind of flip sides to go and do the right thing or turn against their own, boss, their own orders, whatever. And it's kind of I guess I think like rebellion. I guess I love the idea of rebellion, but it's not rebelling for the sake of rebelling, because then you're just defining yourself by whatever it is you're rebelling against. You're still kind of beholden to it. And instead of people finding, okay, well, what's the right thing to do here? And kind of avoiding, regardless of authority or orders or whatever. But it's got to be people following their conscience, But then
and of course, one of the biggest problems is her relationship with her boyfriend, which is the reason she's on that road in the first place. And again, I warmed to the character so quickly. The minute he phones up, gives a lift home, love. It's like, you dickhead.
I knew he wasn't going to get much screen time, so to speak. So you need to make it immediately apparent that this guy is a jerk and she can do much better.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, the whole thing where he's telling her, like, you know, because she's got these dreams of going off and trying to follow a career in music, and he's like, no, you should stay here and work in the chip shop.
Work in the chip.
That was ridiculous. Like a friend of mine at college, Kayla, she like she's from Cumbria, and like, I mean, this is like a long time ago now. But I remember her telling me that like she was the first person in her family who'd ever gone to uni, and like her family tried to talk her out of it. It's like, you know, you should stay here and work in a shop in Millham, you know.
That's so common, isn't it?
Always stayed with me. It's kind of like literally they're like trying to guilt trip her into staying and spending her life working in a chip shop, you know.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from. It's just kind of like, you know, and there's the fact that, but like a more important thing holding Kay back is, well, she's looking after a gran, you know, like a gran lives alone in this old farmhouse, which again is inspired by like one of my other great aunts lived in an old crumbling farmhouse, you know. But that's not like, that doesn't feel like a ball and chain. That like Kay wants to stay to look after the gran. Whereas a gran saying, no, you should go off and live a life. You know? So that's you know, that's what I mean about having like an emotional bond rather than just kind of like you know, like she's got a sense of like conscience and responsibility, I guess.
We've had a little comment. 7 Dreams from Barry. But I think that is the title of the episode that I was referring to on Babylon 5. We've got an absolute fan on the watching the show. Thanks for that, Barry.
I thought he was referencing Kay's journey as a character and her starting point.
Me, in fact.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
That's what we'll call the sequel.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Barry. Even more of a geek than I am.
And of course, with a character like Kay, with the rich backgrounds, not just on the Isle of Man and the mythology behind it, and there is that ability to expand, I dare say, and tell different stories with her. And I don't mean she goes to London, then she falls into another mystery. But the fact is, as I was saying earlier, it seems to be, and maybe it's because we all come from rural backgrounds, it seems to be a world that I could totally get behind. I was totally familiar with a world like a lot of rural Britain, which still not stuck in the past, but seems has shadows of the past in the stonewalling, in those old crumbling houses that you know, people still live in today.
Well, that's actually really reassuring to hear, because that's exactly the tone we were aiming for, wasn't it? But yeah, like, again, I don't want to spoil it, but you know, I wrote a short story that's kind of like just a prose story that's kind of like a cross between an epilogue and a sequel kind of thing. And I won't even say who it's about or what it's about, but it's kind of like, it felt like there was more of that world to explore, you know? So yeah, like I can't really talk about it without spoiling.
No, but it's certainly a rich mythical universe you've created. Certainly, and it's certainly one you can dip into and even expand on, I dare say. Yeah.
You know, I have toyed with the idea. You know, we'll see how this one does first, I guess.
Yeah,
and obviously we don't want to give away all of the mythical creatures but are they sort of your standards, or have you created new creatures?
It's inspired from Manx folklore specifically. Although, you know, as I was saying before, I took significant liberties. Like the Isle of Man is named after Manannan Mac Lir, you know, the son of the sea god, and like there's an element of that mythology mixed in there. But as I say, I've taken liberties with the mythology. But of course, myths always have multiple versions anyway. You know, it's not history and it's not like science. So there's always different interpretations, different conflicting versions. So I just created my own conflicting version. But there's other characters like the Glashtan is a creature from Manx folklore, the Fnoddery, things like this. I just kind of, you know, I've read a lot of books of Manx folklore I was about to say research, but it's not really research. It's more just fishing for inspiration. You know, it's like, what can I pluck out of this and then mess around with it and turn it into something that's, you know, it's not the traditional version kind of thing. You know, but yeah, a lot of the Manx fairy tales are kind of like, oh, this drunk guy was walking across the field on the way home from the pub and he saw a horse. Ooh, supposed to be horse. I was like, okay, and that's the story.
Yeah, that's their version of the UFO story.
Saw a horse.
No, I'm being mean. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff in there, but, you know, and I didn't want to just have it be a complete smorgasbord of like every creature from Manx folklore, but there's a kind of quirkiness to the folklore there. like I said, there's the whole thing about rats.
Yeah, that's just bizarre.
Like I knew that was the thing I really wanted to get in there, because I remember that reaction I got as a kid. Just that always stayed with me.
That is unusual.
And like, for example, the glass gin is meant to be there's lots of different versions of it. Sometimes it's just a guy, sometimes it's like a hairy man, sometimes it's like a goat or something. And I just wanted to, come up with something that would be like a cross between, like a mixture of all of these different things. But you could see how the various different versions of this folklore might have evolved in different ways. Because of course the other thing about fairy creatures is they're famously kind of mercurial. They're shapeshifters. They're kind of like they're not scientific things. They're unknowable. So we wanted that sense of like, you can never quite pin down exactly what's going on.
And when obviously doing all these creatures, Nick, what were your sources of inspiration for the designs of the creatures? Did you go into the books, or was it more sort of a free license to do your own versions?
There was again a bit of a combination of those things. Like I did do some outlandish designs. I don't know if you recall, Andy. Like I did that, like a fairy that sort of floated. It's sort of like this modular creature that with bits that detached and stuff like that. But we needed to sort of retain a certain traditional vibe. So I did refer quite a lot to Arthur Rackham stuff. Your classic fairy illustration, and for certain things.
Brian Froud stuff as well, didn't I, as I recall?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and especially later on when we see more characters and more supernatural characters, they had to have a vibe of that old fairy book vibe, but also be kind of scarier and it was quite tricky actually to it's quite easy to design really frightening monstrous stuff, you know what I mean? It's quite difficult to create something that's spooky that is kind of based on reality, so like based on real animals and based on things like that, because real animals are just animals, so it's just finding that middle ground. I hope it works. You'll have to tell me.
Well, looking forward to finding out, to be honest, mate.
I knew that we wanted to have a sense of like the fairy creatures having a connection to nature, and the idea that nature doesn't really have our best interests at heart. It just kind of does its own thing, and like the kind of the wildness and the feral quality of nature, and that combined with this slightly kind of shape-shifting mercurial quality. So they could be friendly, they could try and bite your face off. You're not quite sure, and it could go either way. So I think Nick, and there's, that's the sort of thing that's easy for me to describe, but it's really hard for for Nick to draw that. If I'm just giving these vague impressions.
How do you get all that across with the character design? Yeah.
But no, I think you did a great job.
We have got a question. Sorry, go on, Nick.
Oh no, go on.
Remember what you wanted to say. We'll say.
Okay, sorry. I was just going to say that there's a wildly huge variety of fairy designs out there, and in just one poem you'll find so many designs, of these creatures that I found at one point when I was creating, some of the characters, that it was difficult to sometimes create a unified look because of the amount of creatures that we encounter. So that was quite tricky, because we wanted to show the variety, but at the same time not let it run away from you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We've got a question for Andy from Barry. Generally for stories, is it world building first or character first, or a theme that resonates, or scenario, or a combination? Do you have multiple projects at different stages of baking until the mix is right? That was a lot of questions there, Barry.
No, it's a good question, and it's an excellent question, because I think the answer is probably all of those things. I mean, yes, I always have multiple projects bubbling away in the back of my head, and it is very much like he says baking, you know, I always think of it as like percolating or gestating, you know, like various different story ideas will float around. And some of them will develop more than others. And sometimes they will kind of like merge together, like two different separate ideas will suddenly unexpectedly kind of link together and make some spontaneous new thing. And it's kind of like, I need to go and write that down. And I'll suddenly leap to the nearest keyboard, you know. But like in terms of where they start, it varies wildly. Sometimes it starts with a character. Sometimes it starts with a, you know, like almost like seeing a movie trailer in your head. You can just see bits of it. You can see the high points or the exciting bits, or the, you know, some significant twist, but you're not quite sure what fits in between them. So yeah, I'm quite kind of chaotic, I think, in the way stories come together with me. I'm not somebody who just sits down and churns it out. There's a certain amount of faffing around and a certain amount of randomness to it with me but when you know, like enough of it has come together that it kind of reaches a sort of ignition point where it's kind of like, okay, that's something now. I've got something now. I need to start actually writing this down. And often I find that, you know, I think I haven't got a story yet. I don't know how it all connects. Like I say, because I'm quite kind of like scatty. But what I find, and I'll just write myself reams and reams of notes, you know, just as they occur to me, because I've got a terrible memory. So if I don't write them down, and I'll just send myself emails. And then I get thousands and thousands of words of notes that just becomes this alphabet soup. And I'm like, how do I organize this? So I found a really good trick is to just use scene cards. You just get like a, you know, little cards, you know, blank business cards or index cards or whatever, and just write down like a bit of the story, you know, all the bits I've thought of. And then I just lay them out on the kitchen table and rearrange them until they're in the right order. Or like, well, if this happens, then that makes that thing happen. Okay, well, if that happens, then that makes him do that, you know. And often I find that, you know, I've actually got the whole story already. I just haven't actually got, you know, I just needed to go through the process of laying it all out. But there's something about seeing it visually on the table in front of you. It's kind of like, okay, there's the twist at the end of Act 1. That's the thing that like triggers the climax kind of thing, whatever it is, you know. And so I've always got like different things on the go. My problem is that when I'm supposed to be finishing one thing, I get excited about like the next.
Of course.
Oh, right, I so get that one. Yeah.
You know, so I need to actually finish stuff. You know.
It's an occupational hazard, I think. That's it can be a short attention span, I guess, to a certain extent.
Well, I've got ADHD, which is a big part of it. I only got diagnosed 2 or 3 years ago, but like now, I didn't really know what it was. You know, I thought it was fidgety kids in school. You know, and it's kind of like now I know how it works. Like, oh my god, it's like my whole life makes sense.
Right?
It's really fascinating finding out how many creative people have ADHD. People who can't do the 9 to 5, and we've got so much in common. I keep meeting people who are like, you know, oh my god, I'm like that. You know, it's super common. You know, especially amongst, you know, freelance creatives.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard, isn't it? A lot of people who are older assume that they're not affected by these things. You know, it's like, well, that's a kid's thing.
You know? We didn't have it.
Yeah,
there was no label for that, was there, back when we were in school?
So they don't grow out of it. They just become unhappy adults, you know, just grinding away, trying to fit into a world that's not quite geared up for them. Anyway, but now that I'm kind of understand how all this stuff works, I'm kind of like, instead of just kind of grinding my gears in the wrong direction, I'm more trying to use that kind of spontaneity to actually, because I can be wildly productive if I'm following my own enthusiasm.
Yeah,
I'm trying to work in a way that, you know, there aren't any gatekeepers and there aren't any anybody kind of creating drag or trying to bend it out of shape into something else that they want it to be. So I'm currently in the process of writing a fantasy novel, which started off as a whole separate series of. In fact, that's an interesting one because like that's a combination of several different story ideas that did start with characters first, and then I thought, well, okay, and I'm trying to figure out the backstory of a character. I ended up having to invent a world in which that could take place, and then I realized, this other character I made up, that could also be a character in the same world. And then I realized how their stories intersected. And then a completely separate story, I realized, well, if I put that in this world, then that can run parallel, and then it all intertwine. And so I realized that, okay, this is a novel. This isn't a comic. It's too complicated. And the great thing about it, and I'm not even talking to editors or publishers or anything until I've got the bloody thing written, which will take me a long time. But it's really nice being able to allow my scatty spontaneity to just jump to the bit that I'm inspired by right now, because I've got the whole story in my head. I know the whole thing, like, it's like I say, it's big and complicated, but I can just jump to the bit like I want to write this bit where he does this, or that bit where she does that, or the thing where I've got to explain whatever this is. Probably sounds very abstract. I'm just trying not to spoil the story.
I think by law, you've got a fantasy novel has got to be over about 800 pages anyway. So, I think that's the law.
Trilogy. Like the thing I'm dreading is I know if I ever finish the damn thing, and if I ever approach a publisher, the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, can you do a trilogy?" And I don't, I don't know what it is with fantasies. Why do they always have to be trilogy?
Oh man, yeah.
Everything's trilogy nowadays, though, isn't it?
So they can get the most out of it, milk the most from it. If it's a success, we've got to make 3.
What about a Wheel of Time? Is 12 volumes.
I haven't got the.
That's a lot of wheels.
Yeah.
But I've made a real rod for my own back. I should have started off writing like a really nice, short, tight little airport thriller.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
For like 5 point of view characters, each of them
just
live
a play
in a country on a made up fantasy world with it's kind of like. So what, like I don't just have to do the world building and the kind of explaining, the exposition. I've got to do that like in 4 different ways for 4 different characters. It's like, why am I making life hard for myself? But it seems to be what my brain is telling me to do. So, okay, brain, I'll do that.
Just ride that inspiration when it happens. Yeah.
The same question could be asked of you, though, Nick. I mean, obviously, depending on how the script comes to you. I mean, does one inform the other, or do you think, do you know what? I want to start with the characters on this project, or is it I need the world to look a certain way before I invest in the characters?
Just rewind a little bit. What is it that you're asking me about? What do I focus on?
Clarify your question.
Right. So you've been given a script by Andy. He's given you plenty of notes on both characters and the world that he wants these characters to live in. Yeah. Which comes first for you? Which one gets your juices flowing the most?
Oh, for me, it's definitely characters. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, in my very short career, I've been very I've everything I've done has been about very specific characters. You know what I mean? Like, and not sort of generic characters like superheroes and things like that. Just about everything I've worked on, apart from Star Wars, is have been about protagonists. So like that's where my headspace is. It's all about a specific person or a couple of people have a bunch of problems to deal with. So yeah, I always tend to focus on the people first. I mean, interestingly enough, though, like as we've said before, this one, the place is very much a character. So I think for me, being able to kind of in my head, even though I've not been to the Isle of Man, being able to picture and feel the place in my head because of where I was raised, felt like I had this other character ready to go. You know what I mean? Like like when Andy told me about it and when I read the script, I was like, got it. You know what I mean? I know what that's about. And then focus on the people. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, it does. Thank you very much. I mean, you mentioned it's because you started off in teaching, didn't you, Nick?
Yeah. I used to be an art teacher, yeah, for a few years.
Another one.
But it's
another
funny,
teacher.
Like I wonder if like I have ADHD because man, it was hard work.
No, that's just the teaching profession, mate. I'm telling you that.
yeah, I guess so. I was an art teacher for a few years.
How did you manage to? Because obviously breaking into comics doesn't happen overnight, and the rigors of being a full-time teacher is quite difficult. How did you manage to sort of balance both working as a full-time teacher and pursuing the dream job of comics?
Well, I think the truthful answer is that I didn't balance it. I think I tried to. When I first got sort of approached to work on something, it was completely on a sort of indie, on an indie kind of level. So I'd never really done anything long form. I'd done like single-page stories and 5-page stories here and there. That's all I'd ever done. So I was approached to work on something by these guys, and Adam and DJ, and the next thing I know is I'm in the middle of this Amelia Cole story, and it kind of snowballed. And to be honest, I'd always wanted to be a comic artist. I just never ever figured out how to do it, you know. And so when they approached me, I got swept up by it quite a bit. So I spent 1 year trying to balance the two. And so what was happening was I'd be going to working all day, coming home, having to deal with the things that you have to deal with, which normally it takes teachers right into the evening to do. But then I was rushing all that stuff, and then just trying to start work around 5, 6 in the evening. So I would work on my comic stuff until about 1 in the morning, then get up the next day. So by the end of that year, I was a mess. I was an absolute
burnout.
You're only 25.
So basically, I just made the choice. I just said, look, I'd rather be doing comics, so I'm going to have to find a way of doing it. So I ended up then cutting my hours, and then I changed jobs, and I became like a long-term art supply teacher.
Yes.
So I would get like these long-term positions that allowed me not to have as much responsibility.
Get in there, do the job, no marking, go home,
home, get to work. So I did that for a few years until 2015, 2016, which was when I got my first Dark Horse book, and that's when I was like, right, I'm done. I'm not doing teaching anymore. And then I just took the plunge, took a massive pay cut as well. So that's how it worked. I just kind of balanced it a bit.
And how did you two get together for this specific project? Was for you, Andy, was it something you saw in Nick, or was it conversation over a beer at a convention? How do these things get off the ground?
I already knew Nick, and like knowing you is like a big part of it, you know, because I really, you know, I like your art, and I like you. You want to work with people you like, you know. And
cool.
I just, you know, and like when we talked about it, you were just like, as you say, you were just kind of like, you just got it, you know, you just immediately got it. So it was easy, you know.
Just a natural
I think it came up. We were doing a signing at Traveling Man, you and I.
That was it. Yeah, I just kind of ran it past you then. Yeah,
we were just sitting there together, and then
was that 2000 AD signing? It was just like an anniversary or something like that. They did like 2000. They were doing signings like the comic shops all over the country, I think.
I think so. I can't remember.
It's all a blur.
Yeah, I know that.
Well, we've got to the end of the hour, unbelievably.
We have.
But we do have one last question from the chat, so I'm going to bring that up. It's from Barry again. Thank you, Barry. Question for both. What artists are you seeing in comics which really excite you about
and
the
writers?
medium? Oh, and writers. Sorry. Yes.
Oh boy!
So if we ask Nick first.
That's a big question.
It's a big one, that is.
Just throw it at the very end of the show.
Yeah.
That's a
Thanks,
big
Barry.
bloody question. That is.
Well,
I don't know, because I've sort of dropped off the radar a little bit. I'm kind of hardly reading any comics these days. I mean, there's
books not going to write yourself.
I'm mostly kind of reading old stuff, you know. So
yeah.
I'm probably doing a terrible disservice to lots of talented new up and coming people, but yeah, I don't know. I've kind of like I've dropped off the radar. Sorry,
that's a good honest answer. That's a good honest answer. I like it.
Well, let me tell you, Andy. Check these guys.
Here we go. It's going to educate you now.
I tell you, have you seen Bilquis Everly's work on Supergirl?
Oh, so good.
No, and like I remember her doing these amazing tiny little pencil sketches that were almost like microscopically small. They were incredible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely delightful. Like that's my idea of comics. And There's like James Harron. Do you know James Harron?
Oh, wow!
He's
yeah.
the guy that
on the spot like this. I'm sorry. I'm a terrible comics person.
We'll forgive you, Andy. You're busy writing.
I'm gonna fire over some James Harron at you. He's super expressive. Like there's a little clutch of those guys: James Harron, Daniel Warren Johnson.
Oh, he's nuts, isn't he? Yeah.
Well, all those guys who are influenced heavily by manga. So they've got like the explosive quality of manga, but
the storytelling is there, isn't it?
Yeah,
the action storytelling is great. Yeah.
But they slap on the paint, man. They just throw that ink on there. It's absolutely wonderful. Who else is there? Writers. I've quite enjoyed what Tom King has done. You know, with like
Supergirl
Human
as well.
Target and
Supergirl
and that sort of stuff.
Human Target is great.
It's hard to put you on the spot after an hour of chatting, isn't it?
I know.
The minute you come off air, you'll go, "Oh, I wish I'd said this personal. I wish I said the writer I'm working with next."
Oh yeah,
Hinted.
Kevin Scott's really good.
There you go. That's the question. That's a question I try actually not to ask on the show because I know it's one that a lot of guests hate that question. Like, I don't want to answer that.
My mind immediately goes blank.
And then the next time you're in convention, everyone's going to get you into a corner and beat you up. Why didn't you say my name?
Yeah, why not me?
Yeah, but see, Andy's got the luxury of like having worked with Jock and people like that. So you can just sit back, Andy, and go, well,
It doesn't matter what I write; it's going to look good anyway.
Barry says sorry.
You're forgiven, Barry.
Yeah, you asked a good question earlier, so we'll let you on.
Yeah, I'll let you on.
Right, guys. So we have come well past the hour, and it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you guys and giving us a real insight, actually.
Yeah,
man. The book.
Considering we weren't allowed to give too much away, we've managed to cover quite a bit.
Yeah, and I hope that people watching are, as enthused as we are about the whole premise of it, and will download it. I mean, it's super bargain. So it's incredibly good value, I think, on Comixology.
I'd like to say, like, I think a lot of people were, have been sideswiped a little bit by the Comixology changeover.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them don't realize that it does actually work. Like the system is up and running and working. I think because there were a few teething problems when they swapped over, people have just dropped it. You know what I mean? And it's like, no, it works. Just go, go on.
Free comics, free bloody comics.
Well, it is like free comics, really. If you're a Prime
but also
member,
if you're not, you can buy it as well.
And it's still really good value. And I think that's what happened. Like a few friends of mine said that, I can't use it anymore. It doesn't work. But then it didn't take them long to fix the glitches.
It's a big company. They were never going to let it last.
But bear in mind, the guys actually running Comixology, they got bought by Amazon. So, it's not really. They have done everything they can, and they've got it up and running again now. And if Jeff Bezos can put a rocket into the sky, he can sort out Comixology Reader on Amazon. But they've got it fixed. Like issue 1 of Cold Iron, I think it's 28 pages for like $2.99, I think, something like that. So it is pretty good.
Great, isn't it? Old school prices.
Everyone loves a good big comic.
So everybody, get out there, read it, enjoy
buy it.
Yeah, tell everyone else about it.
Print.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Andy, for coming on to the show. It's been good to see you guys. We'll see you very soon. All right. All the best.
Good luck. Thanks, gents. All right. Cheers. See you guys.
Play that video, Sam. He's gone. He's not in the office.
Oh, no.
I've got to play
how shoddy.
That was shoddy, wasn't it? Now I've got to play the video manually.
Why do we even keep him on?